So December 2nd, and we've got a ton of stories to get into today further on the increasingly negative trajectory in diplomacy between the United States and Europe. The Pentagon has halted its working level contacts with Germany's defense ministry, including communication related to Ukraine. The Atlantic reports this, citing German Lieutenant General Christian Freuding. Freuding says he used to text his American counterparts day and night, but now the communication has been severed, really cut off. Washington has simply stopped responding. Top German defense officials reveal that they received no prior warning when the Trump administration paused weapons shipments to Ukraine. Germany only learned after the decision was already made. To understand U.S. policy, German diplomats in Washington are actively trying to find somebody in the Pentagon who will explain what's going on. This trend of increasingly embracing Russia, an economy that is 1.8% of global GDP, not the 14% that the USSR represented, mind you. This is Russia. This is only 1.8% of the global economy. On the other hand, the EU is almost the same size as the US economy. To discard all of that in favor of Russia is just something that we are not going to understand until later. I try to keep this channel apolitical, but it's getting increasingly more difficult. The blue line here, just to show you what we're talking about, the blue line here is the U.S. economy. The red line is the Russian economy. The Russian economy is 5.9%. That was before the war, before things got bad in Russia. It's 5.9% the size of the U.S. economy, guys. And we're going to skip from that. But in response, the good news is that Europe is increasingly rallying around Ukraine and coming up with all sorts of solutions for weapons and aid in order to, we actually have an aid story coming up about Russia in a minute. It's probably why the confusion. Macron alludes to something massive coming in terms of ending Russia's economy. In the weeks to come, the pressure on the Russian economy and the capacity of Russia to finance the war effort will change drastically. With the largest oil company in Russia reporting earnings down 79% year over year for the third quarter 2025, even before Ukraine's November blitz of strikes on the Russian oil industry, Putin has very limited time for Trump to save him. Likely that Rosneft is now a money-losing company. The largest oil company in Russia, just reported third quarter earnings, and all the headlines were about the 9-month earnings from January 1st to September 1st. They didn't want to include, or to September 30th. They really didn't want to include the third quarter, but when you dug down into the earnings report, the third quarter alone, year over year, comparing the third quarter 2025 to the third quarter 2024, was down 79%. Not the headline number of the 9 months, only 70%. You see how Russian propaganda works. Everything is always to minimize the damage. They're carefully letting out all this information just to boil the frog, just to let everyone know it's sort of in a really controlled manner. And here's a visual representation just to show you that Ukraine's attacks on Russian refineries just hit a record in November. Drones hit the oil processing plants at least 14 times last month. And now they're not only hitting the refineries and the storage facilities and the pipelines and the pumping stations, they are hitting the tankers that are moving this stuff out on the Black Sea, which they didn't have permission for. Everybody tried to stop them from doing this. And it was a lot about, they didn't want the world oil prices to be driven up. And once again, oil prices have not gone up. And once again, Ukraine was right. Russia's Lukoil to lose its largest single asset abroad. A total of 12 billion barrels of oil reserves in Iraq will be handed to an American company. Iraq has decided to transfer Lukoil's local assets to American oil companies. And this is about 500,000 barrels per day in Iraq, 75% owned by Lukoil, and the Iraqi government is nationalizing that, and they're going to sell it off to, it appears to be either ExxonMobil or Chevron is going to pick up this stuff. Very good news for American oil companies and very bad news for Russia. And we have another of Russia's top bankers calling for a devaluation of the ruble. Another headache for Putin as the calls to devalue the ruble get louder. VTB First Deputy Chairman Dmitry Pianov believes that the ruble exchange rate is not real. There is a serious problem with its formation in Russia. This is, as you know, we covered German Gref. He's the top, most powerful banker in Russia. He came out, 5 days ago. I covered it on this channel. He's calling for a devaluation to 120 rubles to the dollar from its current, whatever, 77. These are not organic protests with these guys just coming out, like this guy just didn't wake up this morning and go, I'm going to go make a statement to the press calling for the devaluation of the ruble. No, these are powerful, powerful guys. They're not allowed to speak on an issue of this size and potential consequence without some sort of management from the Kremlin. He got a call and he had to make the statement. His statement is, I think that at least there is a problem with the ruble's exchange rate. A possible alternative could be a floating currency ban. So that is 2 calls to devalue the ruble from the 2 of the most powerful bankers in Russia in the course of about 6 days. And as I've frequently said on this channel, we have all the necessary pieces of the puzzle, the ultimate collapse, USSR style collapse of the Russian economy, Russian societal collapse. We've got the unaffordable war. We have all sorts of elements that we didn't even have in the 1990s. And I've always said that, the only thing we're really missing is just the low oil prices, right? Well, I missed one. And you remember the HIV epidemic that we didn't find out about until after the USSR collapsed because they wanted to keep it quiet. Well, all the devils are here. We have it in spades. We are waiting still just for the collapse in oil prices. But we've got this. Russia's quiet HIV epidemic continues to swell. Now with 1 out of every 25 men aged 15 to 50 infected. Authorities now suspect the rate is much worse considering the lack of tests. Russia has caught up with Africa in the spread of HIV. The number of people living with HIV in Russia continues to grow over the past year. It has increased to 35,000 people to 1.25 million, according to Vadim Pokrovsky, head of the Federal Scientific and Methodological Center for AIDS Prevention and Control, and a member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. So this isn't some Western propaganda, you globalist stooge I see in my comments all the time. This is Russians saying we have an AIDS epidemic and nobody's even testing. We don't even know how bad it is, and we have to do something about it before it gets completely out of hand. We're already on par with Africa. So, and there's the article, so I'm not making up any of this stuff. This is the article itself. You go to Moscow Times. And as the failing Russian dictator, what would you do when faced with catastrophic economic collapse? Your largest companies on the verge of bankruptcy, an unaffordable war, several oil refineries, a night exploding. You've got a looming blockade of the Black Sea, another sanctions package coming from the EU. Things are just getting worse and worse every day. Well, what would you do? Well, you know what he's going to do. Putin last night announced an expansion of the war. I'll read you the quotes. It is necessary to establish a so-called, in quotes, security zone in Ukraine along the border with Russia within the, in quotes, area of responsibility, all terms to give the domestic population some sort of semblance of control, that no matter how bad things get, it's all part of the plan. It's all under control. In practical terms, this means an attempt to expand control over the border regions of Kharkiv, Sumy, and Chernihiv along the entire line of contact in the, in quotes, special military operations. This is a quote from Putin. The initiative is completely in the hands of the armed forces. In the hands of the armed forces. You see all these control statements? This is mainly aimed at the domestic population. And second on that, anytime you see the scared little man in the bunker, pale, hunched over, low energy, this is the real Putin, guys. This is not the guy they sent to Alaska with the giant head that just has endless energy, bounding energy, just can never sit still, always twitching his feet. That's not the real Putin, guys. This is the real guy. When you see him in the bunker and he meets with only 3 separate people, that is the real Putin. Ukrainian intelligence themselves say that there's at least 4 Putin. So the war's about to get more expensive for the Russians. All this stuff doesn't even matter. Putin is just going for it. This is going to be incredible, guys. For the month of November 2025, Russia lost over 30,000 troops in exchange for capturing 468 square kilometers of Ukraine, approximately 0.0776% of the country. And to visualize that, let me bring it over here so you can see a little clearer. All of that, everything that they're doing is for this right here. They lost 30,000 more guys for this. And endless treasure, how many oil refineries, now how many ships. And Putin is now doubling down. He says he's now going to expand the war. So that is going to be likely an invasion from Kharkiv, Sumy area, which is going to be catastrophic. They're not walking into an unprepared, 2021 Ukrainian army. This is a battle-hardened army that's increasingly getting better and better weapons. And last night in Russia's colony of Chechnya, this is a very long-range strike. Things don't seem to be going well at the location of the Akhmat Special Regiment in Russia's colony of Chechnya. This was a pinpoint strike of something like 1,000-something kilometers way out in Chechnya. This was direct hit on a military unit. I didn't include the after photos. It's a building that was completely wiped out. And on the propaganda front, for some reason, it's just still being allowed, while in Europe, politicians are being arrested for taking Russian cash to push propaganda. But in the US, it's just not happening yet for some reason. And this is just in reference to a tweet that is out of an American, I think she was a congresswoman at some point, or a senator, and Carrie Lake. She's in Arizona. The Americans know who she is. And now her timeline is just all of a sudden filled with Kremlin propaganda. John McCain helped lead a color revolution in Ukraine, which is the reason more than 1 million people have been killed or wounded, and hundreds of billions of dollars have been raided from America to fund the Ukraine war. I guarantee that Carrie Lake cannot find Ukraine on a map, has no idea when Maidan was going on, what the heck was going on with it, who were the parties, but I guarantee that she is taking cash now from the Russians to fill her timeline with slop like this, and I wish the Americans would look into this. And we've got Putin committing to a further information blockade of Russian society as the economic situation gets worse and worse. Hiding the reality on a relative sense to how the rest of the world lives is becoming more and more important for the survival of the Putin regime. Moscow and St. Petersburg, following Siberia and the Urals, have begun jamming WhatsApp. And so now WhatsApp is adding itself to this. Pretty much everything Western is going to be blocked, probably within the next year, and it'll be completely relative to how bad things get in Russia. Because convincing the Russians that there's blood on the streets of Paris and that the West is engaged in some horrific, world war, the reality is going to get more and more ridiculous, and then selling that to the Russians so that they don't ask questions, so they keep those pitchforks at home. And this is part of that. And we are going to see eventually a total information blockade a la USSR, with North Korea really as the as Putin's model for this entire thing. And that's all I've got for you today, guys. And all right, have a good one.